Hello Life Church, welcome to our Wednesday evening interactive service, and we're so very glad you tune into these. And if you haven't seen Susan's message on Sunday, please do watch it before listening to this, because it was fantastic. It was a real strong challenge to us as a church, and I'm sure if you did watch it, you were really blessed. I was really blessed by that. So we're just going to quickly give a very broad overview of that. And we have two questions coming from that for you to answer and consider. Alright, so Susan was talking about one of the great heroes in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, and that is Elijah from 1 Kings chapter 17. And she just explained how Elijah kind of burst on the scene around about the time that Ahab and Jezebel were looking after the nation of Israel. And Elijah was raised up as a prophet to go and challenge them. And part of that challenge was that he was going to command that there was going to be no rain. And as it turned out, no rain actually fell for 3.5 years, just at his prayer, at his decree. And so, of course, Ahab and Jezebel didn't like that. And after doing that, God called Elijah to go and hide himself. And Susan went into the whole dynamics of that, which is really fascinating. Go and hide himself in the brook Kerith. And so he did, and yet he lived out the fulfillment of the prophecy he gave, which was that there was going to be drought, and the brook itself started to dry out. But he was looked after and fed by ravens. They brought him meat. And Susan brought out an amazing point, and that was that ravens were an unclean animal. Ravens were an unclean bird. Why would God ever use something unclean to look after one of his prophets? And Susan brought out the point that, Elijah really needed to learn to trust God and to have patience in trusting God. And so she brought it all together under the whole element of know who to trust. Know who to trust. She went on to tell us about the fact that sometimes when we're in a scenario like Elijah was and the brook starts to dry up, you may feel as if, okay, there's no resource here, things are really starting to peter out here, nothing's happening, this is a trial, I must be outside the will of God. But Susan really powerfully brought into the equation that sometimes being in a trial means that we are in the direct, perfect center of God's will. Even though we may be in a trial, even though it looks like things are drying out, even though it looks like things aren't working out the way we wanted them to, God can still use that for his better purposes. And that's what he was doing with Elijah. And Susan, I would say, prophetically suggested that our church has been going through that, a time of that, because of the last 12 months, because we've been in lockdown for most of it. And we've gone through our own trials, and in the midst of all of that, it's almost like God has said to us, go and hide by the brook. This lockdown has been our brook, where it looks like, we were having some momentum as a church, and then bang, this pandemic hit so many people, including churches, including our daily rhythm of life as a church. But Susan was suggesting, and I would really agree with this, that this time has been a real preparation for many churches and a real preparation for us as Life Church. In the midst of a pandemic, we've been building for coming out of the pandemic, and we've been building the cafe and making structural changes to the church and doing what we can do in order to come out of this strongly. And for us to be what God is calling us to be, and that is a hub for God in this community. And Susan brought that out really well as a parallel to what Elijah was going through, and I really believe that as well. But bringing it down to where we're at, 2021, what about us in our daily life? This isn't just necessarily looking at a prophet all those years ago. But the book of James, as Susan reminded us, tells us that Elijah was just someone just like us, flesh and blood, fears, doubts, worries, but yet underpinning it all, an incredible belief in a God of the miraculous. And if God can use Elijah, as Susan said, then God could use us. Because we have our own struggles, we have our own trials. But if we believe God, God can do amazing things in and through us. Susan ended her talk on Sunday powerfully with, I'm not going to tell the whole story because if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it, about a pastor who built a church and an old man who sat at the back of the church. Just a really incredible story of fulfilling the will of God in your lifetime. And that sometimes God calls us to do things and we have a responsibility to say yes, God, because we don't want to get to the end of our lives and look back with regrets. That would be a horrendous way to live, a horrendous way to end our days, looking back saying, God, I remember 20, 30, 40 years ago, you asked me to do this and I said no, and I look back now and I regret it. We don't want to live like that. We want to live like Elijah and say, God, okay, if you're calling me to go and speak to the king, I'll speak to the king. If you're calling me to go and do something miraculously, I'll do it. And I don't have the strength, but I'm going to trust you at your word. As Susan said, know who to trust. And we want to be people in Life Church that trust God. So, with all of that brought together, I have two questions for us. Now, the two questions I'm going to ask are on top of the question Susan asked, because Susan asked the question as she was talking, and it was, if God asked you to go and hide by the brook Kerith, would you do it? Because I'm sure lots of questions would come up out of something like that. If God asked you to do something like that, would you do it? And my two questions are basically coming off that. And the first question is this: what stops you from boldly stepping out and trusting God like Elijah did? You know, God may not be asking us to go and speak to a king, maybe he is, speak to the Queen or speak to the Prime Minister. But God asks us to do things that are outside our comfort zone, that are outside our ability. That's why it takes him to call us to do it, because we can't do it. And he expects us to trust him whenever he does call us to do it. It's not because we're great, it's not because we're mighty, it's not because we've got talents anyway. He'll normally call us at the point of our weakness. And so what would stop you from boldly going where God asks you to go? And it'd be great if you could leave a comment. For some of us, maybe we've stepped out before, and past experience would say to us, you know, it didn't really turn out the way we thought it would turn out. Sometimes that can be a hindrance to us. For some of us, it might be a lack of faith. Maybe you would just honestly say, I really don't have that level of faith to step out for something big in God. Or maybe for some of you, you would say, I have actually a really low self-esteem. And because of that, I kind of shrink back when I think about God asking me to do something. Do you know, if that is you, let me just say this, if that is you, you are perfect material for God to use. Because the Bible says he resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. He gives grace to those who have low self-esteem. And if you look at the whole chronicle of the Bible, it's people that are unqualified, low self-esteem, think they don't have enough faith, or are the last one to be picked for the school football team. They're the ones that God tends to choose. So if that's you, you're in good company. Or likewise, if there's something else that you want to put in to say, you know, this would stop me from boldly stepping out in God, then please do leave a comment for us, because all these comments are really, really helpful. It helps us in our faith going forward. And the second question is the same, only it's the reverse, and that is, what would help you in taking a bold step to go where God calls you to go, or to do what God calls you to do? What would help you? And likewise, maybe you would say, well, do you know what? 10 years ago, I took a step for God and I didn't think it would work out, but it worked out. And that's something I always hold as a testimony. Maybe you could share a story like that, or a testimony. Maybe that helps you when you think about stepping out and doing something for God. Or likewise, maybe you would say, well, you know, some of the stories in the Bible, if I'm ever challenged to step out for God, some of the stories in the Bible I automatically turn to, and they just bolster my faith. Maybe the story of Elijah does that for you. I mean, the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel for me is a winner. You know, he takes on the false prophets of the nation and God answers by fire. What a faith builder that one is. So maybe you would say, yeah, I've seen God do something before, and I look to these stories in the Bible, and that really bolsters, strengthens my faith. That helps me to do what God calls me to do. Or maybe for some of you, it's you just don't have and understanding, or you don't pay any respect to fear. Some of us have that kind of personality. You're just, you're the one that goes on the biggest roller coaster in the in wherever it is they are, in the roller coaster park, whatever it is, in the theme park, that's what it is. Maybe you're the person that goes for the biggest one because you've got no sense of fear. Maybe you go into the slingshot straight away because you're like, yeah, I'm not afraid of anything. Maybe that helps you in your personality to say, God, call me to do anything, I'll do it. Whatever it is. Or maybe you've got something else where you can say, this really helps me to step out in God. Could you leave a comment? That would be fantastic, because these services are interactive. And again, if you're seeing this and it's not Wednesday night, it's Thursday, Friday or Saturday, still jump in, leave a comment. That would be wonderful. It'll just be a real encouragement to everybody else. So there we go. Overview. Elijah taking on the king, prophesying there's going to be no rain. There isn't. He goes to the brook Kerith and he knows who to trust. And the two questions, of course, coming from that are, what would stop you taking a step like Elijah to fully trust God and step out boldly for him? Or what would help you in taking a step for God, stepping out for him and doing something miraculous in his strength? Leave us a comment, and thank you that you do that. Go on ahead.